Hi everybody, welcome back to Between the Lines. My name's Julian, I'm an obsessive reader and used book collector, and today I'm talking 5 adaptations from film and TV that I personally think are better than the books. This list is going to be super subjective. Don't take this as anything less than that. This is just my personal opinion, but I should say I did like all these books on this list and in some cases loved, but the movies just kind of inched them out by being that bit better. And this list is in no way going to be ranked. It's just 5 adaptations, random ones. And there may be some controversial takes on this one. I don't necessarily think so. I think a lot of these opinions are pretty well known and mainstream. So don't expect to be too surprised by the ones on my list, but you might be. All right, so first up on the list, we have The Dark Tower. I can't even joke about that. All right, so the first adaptation on this list that I think is better than the source material, better than the book, is Jurassic Park, directed by Steven Spielberg, over Jurassic Park, the book by Michael Crichton. Like, this one is super easy. For those of you who haven't read Jurassic Park, the book, it's a good book, it's pretty solid, but it's nothing to the classic that is the Jurassic Park film. That is one of the greatest movies of all time, and it was one of my favorites when I was really young, so much so that I wanted to be a paleontologist for about the first 9 years of my life. But for what this movie did in terms of technology, in bringing computer animated effects to such a brand new level, was something that the book just didn't quite do. Like, it's a good book, but it's not revolutionary, it's not anything new. And if you've read Michael Crichton books before, yeah, there's a lot of cool science stuff in them, very interesting ideas, but the characters can come off kind of flat. And that's, I think, another area where the movie really excelled on top of the source material. We had such interesting and in some cases funny characters that were a little more human, fleshed out, and more vibrant than their book counterparts, especially Ian Malcolm as portrayed by Jeff Goldblum, whose performance brought so much to that character. And I think all the actors did a wonderful job in this movie, and they brought so much more life to those characters that weren't necessarily coming off of the page. Although to the book's credit, I should say that there are some cool sequences in there that didn't quite make it into the movie. They would have been really cool to see, but I understand with the limitations of the technology and doing something so new that they couldn't pull those off. One with a T-Rex in the water. They were really tense, interesting scenes that would have added a lot to the movie, but they just probably couldn't pull it off at the time, so I completely understand why it's not in there. So next on the list, we have Stalker, which was directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, and Roadside Picnic, which was written by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky. Stalker is a very highly regarded film in terms of art film, art cinema, foreign film, but has been super influential to a lot, not only in just movies. There's been a ton of movies with the same kind of similar concept to Stalker, where there's this sort of zone, as they call it in the book, where something weird happened. In this case, it was aliens arrived and they promptly left and left a bunch of crazy stuff just lying there. And it's an area that's been blocked off by the government, and people go in there to steal things or find things. And in this book, there's a rumor that you find something there that can fulfill your wishes, and in the movie case, I believe, is to show you your innermost desires. And that concept has been inspired into movies like Annihilation, which is something I really liked, and even Stalker itself was the namesake and kind of the inspiration for the Stalker games, which a lot of people are familiar with. And like a lot of what Tarkovsky did, he took the basis of the book, which is a good science fiction book. It's pretty solid with really interesting ideas, tense scenes, but like his other science fiction adaptation, Solaris, he took that source material and just tried to make it something else. He felt that the stories were maybe limited a bit by genre and wanted to transcend that, kind of break those barriers a little bit, to which he doesn't think he quite succeeded in the case of Solaris. I think I heard him say in an interview, or he wrote that somewhere. But in terms of Stalker, I think he took a pretty straightforward science fiction story, which was a good book and one that I really liked, but created something totally transcendent. Probably the movie that influences my own visual style the most when it comes to my own short films and projects. Tarkovsky had so much intention in every shot, every movement, every piece of story, and the movie is a lot more philosophical than the book. Yes, there are philosophical ideas that are talked about throughout Roadside Picnic, but in the movie Stalker, that's kind of the main point of it, is the inner turmoil and thoughts of these characters going through the zone and how that reflects who they are. And it's a crazy movie also in the fact that Tarkovsky, I think, shot the whole movie 2 or 3 times. Something kept messing up in the production process, and he literally had to remake this movie 2 or 3 times before they got the finished product in the movie we can watch today. Next up, we have one where in this case, I think it might actually be controversial, and that's The Haunting of Hill House, the Netflix show directed by Mike Flanagan, and The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Don't get me wrong, I frickin' love The Haunting of Hill House. The book was so incredible, one of the greatest haunted house stories that I've ever read, and I adore it. But I think the Netflix adaptation did a couple more interesting things with the concept. Such a renowned book was bound to be adapted many times, and it has been. It was adapted into the 1960 film directed by Robert Wise, The Haunting, which is an excellent movie. And if you're a fan of this genre, The Haunting of Hill House, or just film in general, I'd highly recommend watching it. There was also a remake in the 90s, which I haven't watched, but have heard it's pretty bad. But the concept of the book and the original film was that it was a group of people who were sent into this house to see if it was actually haunted. And, a lot of crazy stuff goes on in there, them actually trying to figure out if it is haunted and survive their time there, but it's a lot more muted and kind of off-screen or off-page terror. And the people who are tasked with doing this don't have much personal relationship with each other, but they kind of grow together as the story progresses. But in the Netflix adaptation, Mike Flanagan and the team kind of took that idea but made the main characters into a family, and it became this reflection upon childhood trauma and imperfect parents and what it means to grow up in a family where so much bad stuff has happened. How would you react to crazy traumatic events happening as a kid, and how does that inform who you are as an adult? And I just think that kind of takes the source material and brings it to a more relevant, kind of higher level for me. And because I just love Mike Flanagan's work, he is a great director in the realm of horror, and he brought a lot of modern horror sensibilities to the show without being too jump scary or anything like that, although there are a couple of great jump scares in it. But it's a show that really dives deep into the human condition and what it means to survive this trauma, and in intermingling that with the great horror aspects and the way they flesh out the story in a 10-episode season as opposed to a 2-hour movie, I think was the right way to go about it, and a series that I absolutely love, and love a bit more than the source material. Next up on the list, we have Carrie, directed by Brian De Palma, and Carrie, written by Stephen King. I don't think this is too controversial to most people. Carrie is a solid book. I like it a lot. Very short, very quick and punchy, and is certainly effective, and Stephen King's big debut, and there's a lot to appreciate about it. But the movie, directed by Brian De Palma, is a classic of cinema that a lot of people appreciate, not only in just the horror genre, but in film at large. Brian De Palma in the 70s and a bit of the 80s was just incredible, one of the greatest directors. His recent work hasn't been that great, but the man was just a master back in the day, and Carrie was so good. It's so scary, and there's a reason everyone from my parents' generation is scared of that movie, because it's effective and I think still holds up a great degree. Not to mention the incredible performances in it, but just the filmmaking aspects, the cinematography, the way it's paced, and the way Brian De Palma brought such a striking visual style to what could have been a pretty straightforward horror movie like the unfortunate remake. So for the last one on my list, I was struggling a bit because this involves a lot of my favorite material ever created, my favorite film director, and an author who's already popped up on this list. So it's hard for me to decide. If you've been following the channel, in the couple times I've talked about movies, you may know that Stanley Kubrick is my favorite director, and the man really liked to adapt source material from somewhere else, something he didn't have to come up with himself. So many of his works were adaptations, especially later in his career. Of course, he did a lot of work on the screenplays himself because he was so controlling with his intention with everything in the movies. Of course, he would want control over the screenplay as well. And so there was plenty to kind of pull from on the Stanley Kubrick list, but I couldn't decide what was number one, because I do think that for the most part, his adaptations are better than the source material. So before I made my decision, I was kind of walking through 3 of them, and I'll explain to you my thought process before I get to the one I actually picked. So first we have 2001: A Space Odyssey, which may be my favorite movie of all time, and it was based sort of on the book by Arthur C. Clarke. Although it wasn't really based on that, Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke wrote the book and screenplay, came up with the story together, and while Kubrick was making the movie, Clarke was writing the book. So it was kind of a joint effort and not necessarily just a straight adaptation like he did with some of his other stuff. I do think the movie is a lot better than the book, although I absolutely love the book. It's the best of the Arthur C. Clarke books I have read. The movie just has that visual aspect and that grand kind of maximalist storytelling. That visual aspect is what makes it great. So I didn't choose that for the reason that it wasn't really an adaptation. And then I thought about A Clockwork Orange, and I thought, yes, do I enjoy the movie more than the book? I do, but it's not my favorite Kubrick movie. It's still a great movie and a classic for a reason. So the one I decided on in the end was The Shining. And yes, I am one of the people who thinks the movie is better than the book. I would expect that a lot of people would argue against this, including Stephen King himself, who famously does not like The Shining movie. But Kubrick took The Shining, the book, and made it into something spectacular. I love The Shining, the book. It is wonderful. It is my favorite haunted house story, just beating out Haunting of Hill House. And there's so much there. There's so much great character work. And it's actually scary. It's hard for a book to really scare me, but The Shining did. But the movie is just so much more. It is scarier and more threatening, just more terrifying. And the grand scale that Kubrick brings to such a kind of claustrophobic story just makes it so great. And a lot of people consider this the greatest horror movie for, good reason. It is so great. The book is amazing and I love it, but The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, is just better. So that's it for the 5 adaptations from film and TV that I think are better than the source material. Again, this is a personal list. Don't take this in any objective way where if you disagree with me, I'm saying that you're wrong and it's actually my way that's the correct one. Don't take it like that. But do let me know in the comments if you disagree with me. I'd be really interested to know what you think about my list here, and if you have any other examples of adaptations you like more than the books themselves. So before you go, remember to do all the YouTube stuff like liking and subscribing. It always helps out and I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for watching. Please remember to support your local library, and I'll see you next time.